Good afternoon, evening, everybody. This is the Cleveland Heights Council Public and Safety and Health Committee meeting. It is May 13th, 2025, 5 o'clock. I'd like to call roll. We have Vice Chair Larson.
Here.
Member Cobb.
Here.
Myself, Jim Posh. I'm here. And we have Council President Tony Kuda joining us. We also have on Zoom Jeffrey Westerfield from the Ohio Department of Natural Resources. We're going to jump right into our first agenda item, which is deer population survey planning with the Ohio Department of Natural Resources. This is why Jeff is on the call with us today. Jeff participated in a public forum we had maybe 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago now. It was very well attended. Jeff presented, and one of the things Jeff has offered to help the district with, not the district, the school district.
You can come in.
Oh, please join us. Yeah. One of the things the Ohio Department of Natural Resources has offered or suggested is a deer population survey. And this is usually a survey with residents. If you're going to do any deer population management, it's a requirement. It takes a pulse and a temperature of the community. But maybe I think we can just sort of let Jeff take it from here on why these things are beneficial, how they can help, how they're implemented. And I believe you may have some draft things that you may want to show us. Yeah, and I kind of look at this as just a discussion, so nobody has to raise their hand or anything. You can just speak, please. So go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah. So when we look at surveying, so when I was there a couple of weeks ago, I talked a lot about data and how we utilize that data. But I think this is a good opportunity to kind of dive deeper into the data part of it. So there's one. Collecting data like deer vehicle accidents, public service pickups, those are easy, right? Just setting up a protocol with the city. That's super simple, basic, easy stuff to kind of gather. The harder part is when we look at trying to assess the deer numbers and how we utilize that, which I kind of talked a little bit about, a couple of weeks ago, but I'll kind of maybe jump into that a little bit more and give you kind of another refresher on that. And then what I think is probably the bigger topic to discuss and talk about tonight is citizen surveys. So, especially for municipalities, it's in large part the citizens that are coming and talking to city council, mayor, administration, about the issues that they're having with deer on their property. And so certainly they should be a large component when we look at, deciding what to do, how much to do, and when to do. I've worked with lots of municipalities over the years looking at the way to assess and survey residents. I've seen it done lots of different ways. Sometimes really good, sometimes so. But one of the big things that has been lacking historically is that, if Cleveland Heights does a survey, all we can benchmark it against is really Cleveland Heights, because whatever questions you ask are going to be your questions, how you asked them, and it makes it hard when we try to compare, and take a look at, how does this, level and especially when we look at it in relation to populations, how does it relate to the situation in Cleveland Heights? So, that was kind of a challenge that has been around historically. So I thought I'd try to tackle that challenge and try to address that somehow. So I'm going to share my screen here for you guys and show you, and you guys are really only the second people to even see this. So that's how fresh off the press is. And you guys actually even get the more fine-tuned version. So I just this week got this all finalized and ready to roll out to the public. But what I did is I said, okay, instead of each city having to kind of reinvent the wheel and come up with the questions, come up with a way how they're going to survey and try to, then get that information, try to analyze that information and make sense of it. I thought, how can I help you guys along that path? So what I did is I created a standardized, basically the goal here is to have a statewide survey. Any municipality, the residents of a municipality or businesses of a municipality can fill out. And it allows the city then to take, like Cleveland Heights, to take a look at what the responses are. And so this is what I kind of call it a bias survey. And I call it that because the survey, you gain very little knowledge when you try to do survey questions like, do you like deer? Do you not like deer? Do you support lethal control? Do you not support lethal control? Because we know there's going to be people on both ends of the spectrum. And really at the end of the day, and I've seen lots of those surveys roll out, when we look at the answers, it provides very little clear guidance on what to do moving forward. And oftentimes cities say, well, I guess we got 52% of the residents said they're okay with lethal control. I guess we go with this, right? And so it creates this kind of quagmire that you got to kind of work through when you're looking at how to assess the situation with the residents. So with this survey and the surveys that I historically have recommended to communities is that what we're trying to assess is, are there deer problems? How many and where? Right. So for the residents of Cleveland Heights, basically the question that is posed to them is that, hey, as a city, we want to be responsive to any of your issues and concerns you have in town. If you have problems with deer on your property, we want to hear about them. What this survey does is allows you to take this survey, this link, and say, and here's where you let us know about this. So what this does is, we capture a first and last name of the person that's filling it out, and we, most importantly, grab an address. So for instance, let's see. Give me 1 second. I'll give you a real life example here.
I could give you one if you want a Cleveland Heights address.
Nope, I got the 971 Oxford.
Okay. It's right by school.
Avenue.
That doesn't look right, but go ahead. You can.
121.
You want to give me your address? I'll take it.
2205 Demington.
Southington?
Dem, DEMINGTON. Drive. It's Drive. That's interesting.
This is how it works. You go to roll something out, things don't work like you expect them to, but
I can't see that.
let's go with this.
It's DEM.
Oh, Demington.
Yeah.
There we go. Got it. So it says it's in Cleveland. In this case, it's a no. It's in Cleveland Heights, right? It is Cleveland, but because we want to get it down to the actual city, to get the data, we do Cleveland Heights. And then question one then rolls into, how do you feel about the current deer population in Cleveland Heights? Is there too many, just the right amount, too few, or not sure? And this gives the person the ability to answer where they're at on this spectrum. Then on here it says, over the last 12 months, which of these problems have you had on your property? Garden damage, deer eating, landscaping, bucks rubbing on trees. And these are all the standard questions and the standard issues we see in towns all the time. It does give them the opportunity to put in another if they want to add in something there as well. And then over the last 12 months, do you guys, give them a monetary amount of value that they feel that they've lost to those deer on their property so they can enter an amount there? And then, because we didn't want to focus, because we recognize that, let's say you almost hit a deer with your vehicle, but it wasn't in front of your house, there are other issues, or they ran into an aggressive deer that was on a walk in their dog, 2 blocks over, right? Is we wanted to give them the opportunity that if there was other areas in the Cleveland Heights that weren't on their property that they had problems, they can provide those responses as well. So if they do that and they say, yes, there was other issues, they can note down, and this is just a simple dot on a map where the problem was, and they can note what that issue was. And again, these are the standard things that people bring up when looking at deer issues throughout town. And again, there's another option there for them as well. And then what would you like the municipality to do regarding the deer population? So decrease, remain the same, or increase?
Hey Jeff, can I interrupt you here? Can I interrupt you with this last question? With the decrease, remain at current level, and increase. So, I mean, the data is suggesting that the deer population is increasing 30% a year. That's on average. So when you say at current,
Correct.
so when you say remain at current level, you don't mean with that increase, do you?
Current trend or current level?
It's the current level where the deer population is today.
Okay.
So not the level of increase, because that does vary over time. And theoretically, if you go back to John Cepanek's talk a couple weeks ago, eventually, theoretically, right, there's a peak. Now that's going to be way, way, way higher than, you'll have every resident calling you before we ever got to that peak. But it does exist. So yeah, I mean, the level would tail off eventually at some point.
Okay.
So they provide their answers on here to what the issues are they're having with deer. They hit submit, and on that, it actually provides them on that once they hit submit. I'm not going to hit submit because I don't want to. I got it live now. I don't want to add a data point in there that's just a test data essentially, but it does provide them a link to the Division of Wildlife's website that has resources for ways to help mitigate, so like gardens and how to address garden damage and how to address other deer-related issues. So it will give them an opportunity to link right to our website for some additional assistance as well. Now, once they enter that information, let me get this out of here. This information gets all collected on a dashboard, and so it'll actually put dots on the map here. It'll calculate the numbers here, and then we can actually sort this data out by the municipality that is having the issues and the dates. So if we wanted to look for a particular year or a year range, we can do that. And I can't click anything because there's no data in here, but like Cleveland Heights would pop up as an option in here. We click Cleveland Heights, it'll give us all the respondents from Cleveland Heights. But the nice thing is that you can see everything around you. So can you see this page here?
Yeah, we see it.
Okay, so it puts dots on the map and it helps spatially kind of look at things that are out there. And so it allows you also to see some of the stuff that's on the fringes of Cleveland Heights that may not be specific to residents, but it gives you a flavor of, are there deer issues occurring outside the city boundaries as well? And all of this data, ultimately I can feed back to the city for all the responses that the folks fill out for whatever, that date range is you want. So the goal is to again try to make this easy for you guys, put together the basic questions that really help guide deer management. And we went through Ohio State to help vet these questions, make sure that from their human dimensions section in the natural resource department that everything kind of looked good with them and that they felt like we were answering or asking the questions that needed to be asked. So we kind of edited it through them as well. So that the other thing is that if the city has additional questions they want to ask above and beyond those base questions, you guys can provide those questions to me and we can add those on as well. So when somebody clicks Cleveland Heights, that information will automatically populate for that community, those additional questions that you guys wanted to know. So it provides some flexibility for you as well. For some reason, there's additional questions that you just want to have an answer to, like what ward are you from? Although we have the spatial dot on the map we can look at, but point is that, there's additional questions that you can ask. So this is all ready to roll out, and I can provide this link to you guys. You can share it with your residents. You can let them start filling this out, post it on social media, website, however you guys would want to disseminate it, and start getting folks to let you know where the situation is in town. All municipalities that do deer management, do sharpshooting programs, I am going to require them to do this. So if that's a program that you guys would get into moving forward, something you guys are going to be utilizing this anyways, and so certainly something to look at. Now, but when we look at population management, there's lots of different ways that you can collect data for the number of deer that are out there. And a lot of it depends on, you want to run a survey when it is, the conditions are right. So for instance, helicopter survey is by far and large my go-to. That's the best survey you can run, because you're counting physical deer, you see what's out there, you can see a lot of other things when you're flying and you're getting that data. So that's kind of I don't want to say that kind of gold standard. I mean, that's what we use, when we're surveying areas, throughout the state for deer management, is we use a helicopter survey if at all possible. But you got to have snow to do that. And obviously, this past winter was great. Plenty of snow. Conditions were right to run the survey for quite some period of time. Several years prior, we had issues with that, where there wasn't enough snow to run that. So, cities and other folks that are managing deer had to rely on some other ways of managing or doing their surveys. So there's aerial infrared that you can do, although you're typically that comes at a pretty high cost. There are spotlight surveys you can run. There are handheld infrared surveys that are done by driving the streets, which is actually a very common survey method utilized in municipalities. And there's a host of other options that exist out there. But ultimately what we do is when we don't manage for a certain number, right? I could care less if there's 473 million deer in Cleveland Heights. What matters most is how are those 473 million deer affecting things in the city. So, that's where we're assessing those residents, how many people are having issues with those deer. And we're assessing, stuff like deer vehicle accidents, service pickups, that kind of stuff. So, but we can take those population numbers. So you can see here a population estimate of 148. And we can take that and start running models. And I kind of gave a model example when I was there a couple weeks ago, and start plugging in. If we're at 148 deer, I know what, to your point, that 30% growth rate is. We can plan for that, and then we know then how many deer do we need to remove in order to keep this number in a downward trajectory, and how far do we need to go in a downward trajectory. So that's where kind of the population numbers come into play. And I help, municipalities go, analyze this data and crunch this data along the way as well. But that's where the population numbers come in, is when we actually get to actually doing management, it helps us know this. And then you can see here, like the citizen survey results, we can utilize that data as well to kind of help corroborate the other data points like service pickups and deer vehicle accidents and our population modeling to make sure that everything is looking right. That 30% is the right number based on how these data pieces are fitting into it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I've got a couple of questions, Jeff. Back to the survey itself, the citizen survey. First of all, how do you address the folks, because we have them in our city who would like to participate, but they don't use computers?
Yeah, so great question. That's where what I would say is that, just have somebody at the city that's willing to take that information for them. So you can say, hey, if you don't have a computer or you need assistance, contact X, Y, and Z, right? And that person can jump on and enter that information for them. I will tell you this, I know computers can be a barrier somewhat, but many years ago, we used to do both our deer and goose permitting by hard paper, and we made a decision to start moving towards electronic, and so we deal with a lot of Amish, we deal with a lot of more seasoned farmers, and so there was concern that we were gonna how are we going to address those folks along the way? We kept the paper forms in place for a year or two, but we quickly learned that at the end of the day, if it's something that they want to get their information in, they will find a way to get that information in. And like Amish are a good example. Every once in a while we run into an Amish, believe it or not, they have access to the internet much more than people think. But we every once in a while run into one that just says, hey, I don't, can you help me out? And then we just assist them in getting their information entered in.
Okay, you talked about perhaps if we wanted to add some questions to your survey questions. I don't feel like if we're going to do that, then we don't want to roll it out to the public yet until we get a chance to, because I'd like to see the questions and compare them. In 2022, we got a good list of questions from Laura Marks and the people that were on the Citizens Committee at the time, and I'd like to kind of look and see, scope out what they were recommending. So for now, I'd like to be able to look at your link and anticipate that comparison. How much does this cost us, and how much would a helicopter survey cost us of actual deer count?
So the citizen survey is free; it doesn't cost the city anything. That's just a free thing I provide. So that's easy and peasy. The helicopter survey is it just depends. So U.S. Department of Agriculture Wildlife Services, they have a helicopter. They do those surveys. So you can get an agreement with them to do a survey for the municipality, and they can get you numbers on what that cost is. It's not super expensive, but that's a relative answer. I don't have a ballpark number to even give you on that, but I can get you in contact with them so you could get that information. But some municipalities will work, so they have either the police department has a rapport with somebody at the airport that has a helicopter. So the protocol is very simple to follow. Any pilot can do it. And really anybody can run the survey. You just need at least one, ideally two, one on either side of the helicopter, looking out the side and counting deer. So it is not a hard survey to run. The protocol is very simple. So if you can find somebody that has a helicopter that you can contract with, then you can run that route as well. And you may be able to run cheaper, or even more so, have a little more flexibility. So I think Wildlife Services helicopter is stationed in Tennessee or Kentucky, one or the other. So they try to get it up here. They have to plan for an X block of time in the hopes that it hits when there's snow on the ground. Sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't. So when you contract with a pilot that is close to home, it gives you a little more flexibility to say, hey, Pilot Bob, this weekend's looking like it's going to be perfect conditions. Can we get you, to get up in the air and get the survey run?
Thank you.
Tony?
So I just can't imagine that a drone can't do the same thing, but I don't know anything about it. But it just seems like a drone. Why couldn't a drone do this?
Yeah, so drones can. It depends on what. So when you're flying, and that's where a lot of folks have been putting a lot of effort lately, is on drones. So when you fly a drone, you've got two options. You can fly either at night and you're using infrared technology to try to count the deer, or you can fly like a helicopter during daylight hours and count them that way. Some of it depends on a couple things. One, if you're flying it during the day, obviously there's a lot more public visibility, right, that you're flying a drone, and you've got to fly it over private properties, which for some drone pilots is an issue. But that would be the ideal way to go. You're just flying that drone. Now you don't, obviously with the helicopter, you're like a city like Cleveland Heights, you're not going to run out of fuel, right? You can basically run that whole survey without having to set back down. On drones, you got to bring them back in, swap out batteries, get them back up, and continue the survey. So you do have a little bit of lag that happens there. If you run it on the infrared at the night, one of the issues we've had with infrared at night is that you miss a lot of deer. So that's just a limitation to its use. But if that's all you got and that's what you can work with, then something we do what we can with what we got, right? So, but again, you still run the same issues of getting that drone back, get batteries swapped out, get it back up and flying again and moving forward. So a lot of work has been looked on the drones, but I will tell you, really nobody has gone, like, especially on a large scale, has gone to, yeah, we're going to go just drones to do our survey work.
So I think it's pretty clear that we are, well, maybe it's not clear, so I think it needs to get said. We are not anywhere close to making any kind of recommendation, any kind of decisions. We're in a mode right now where we're trying to answer the question. We know we have a deer population. Is it too big? Is it not too big? What is sustainable? We've heard a lot of stories about deforestation. We have heard people on both sides saying that, hey, look, if we don't know if we have a problem, but if we have a problem, we certainly don't want to look at lethal options. We want to look at other options such as sterilization. So I think these are things that are still in play right now that we got to figure out. But I think what it comes down to is data. Until you have the data, you really don't know what we're dealing with. And the survey, I believe, is a good way that we can start looking at some data.
The citizen survey?
The citizen survey. If we have
Absolutely.
to take another step and go with like a helicopter survey, that's a wintertime activity. It seems to me that if we're doing that, that decision doesn't have to be made right away. But I'd like to see what the results are from the citizen survey. I mean, how does everybody feel about that?
I think that's the way to go, the survey.
It's valuable.
It's timely because we're heading into summer.
I would agree. So,
Make a comment.
We're here.
sure.
You said you were concerned about the non-internet population in Cleveland Heights. There are a couple of places you can put a computer. You can do it at the libraries.
Sure.
And the librarian can assist somebody filling it out. You could do it at grocery stores on a Saturday. You could do it during voting, have somebody sit there and at the precincts, because the people who don't have computers go grocery shopping, they go to the library, and quite often they vote because they're older.
Yes, we are.
And maybe the Office on Aging might help.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good suggestion. I do know that Beechwood, because of your protocol, Jeff, you're the one that issues the permits on all this, and you're aware of what our local peer cities are doing. Beechwood, South Euclid, Shaker, and they're all conducting surveys. I drive by the Beechwood City Hall, and on their big new beautiful board, electronic board, they're promoting to take the survey. I don't believe that's your survey. I think they're still using their old.
Yeah, she rolled that out already, so I'll probably kick them down to next year of utilizing the survey. But yeah, they had already rolled their survey out for this spring.
So the questions that you showed us this evening, were there any additional questions to those, or is that pretty much the basic questions?
That's the base questions. There's not a lot to it. At the end of the day, like I said, it's just you want to hear from the residents what the problem is, and where are they at, as far as what they feel like the population needs to do, and those three things are really the big things. And really, the biggest thing is just what is the problem that they're in their eyes they're experiencing. And so I always get that question, like, is there a problem? Like, I can answer that question for you pretty simply. Yes, there's a problem in Cleveland Heights. How do I know that? Because I was at a resident's place today looking at deer damage, and she was very frustrated and upset over the deer, actually 2 properties, so I know there's a problem for those 2 residents, right? The problem, or the question is like, how does the city ultimately move forward? If there's 5 people and that's all there is that takes the survey and that says there's a problem with deer, does the city go through a massive program to deal with the deer? I don't see it's kind of silly to do that, right? Because there's going to be money involved and all that. Maybe we just look at what tools we can put in their hands to help address their problem specifically. But if there's 150 people that say there's a problem, then that's a whole different ball of wax, right? Because now we've got a lot of residents scattered all throughout the city that have identified that deer are a problem. They'd like to see fewer deer out there.
So I do have one question, and it kind of comes down to one resident that is very active in our park system, and he's collected data. He's done public information requests, spoke to people in our police department, and he made a public statement in our hearing, and essentially it was, we are killing deer in Cleveland Heights, but we're killing deer with our cars.
Correct.
And there was, I believe, 3, don't quote me on this, I don't have the data in front of me, but I believe it was 300 incidents over the last 2 years, police incidents regarding deer, which I don't know if it's a lot, I don't know if it's a little, there's a lot of data within what each incident is. But I think, I guess what I'm looking for is validation that it makes sense to proceed with the survey, look at the police information that we have, these 300 incidents. Now, as far as time frame goes, we probably need to meet again in order to talk about the questions. If Councilwoman Larson wants to go through and look at Laura Mark's information, I'd like to go see what Shaker and Beechwood are doing with their questions. I mean, I kind of like the idea of what you presented to us, Jeff. It's short and sweet and it's easy. And we have lots of vehicles, lots of information, lots of ways that we can get this out to the community as a city council. We've reached out to the administration. We've asked them to participate this evening. I'd like to still work with the administration to keep them involved, see if they would have any suggestions. Because I think we're not doing anything unless the administration is on board with this work.
I have a few questions, 2 of them are real quick. Would one of the questions on the survey be like, what solution, if you think the deer are a problem, what solutions would you think are best? I mean, is that something you include in your survey, Jeff? In other words, sterilization, culling, I don't know if there's some third thing. Do you put preferred solutions for people who answer yes to the question, the deer are a problem?
No, because solutions are after the identifying what the problems are and to what level, right? So, I always say when you're asking a question on a survey, you got to ask yourself, when you draft the question up, and you need to say, what are we going to do with this, right? So if you ask the question, do you support sterilization? Well, who wouldn't, right? I mean, everybody, if we could deal with a problem without having to kill something, hell yeah, everybody's going to raise their hand. That would be ideal. But is that what the right path is based on the situation in Cleveland Heights? How many people respond to that kind of thing? Well, that's a whole different answer then at that point. And so we could probably, again, we kind of know what the results are going to be when you say, hey, would you support this? The majority of people are, right? But you said, how do you feel about shooting deer, right? Well, most people are going to say, well, I'd rather not happen. I mean, I don't really want to see deer shot, but if that's what we need to do to get to the goals of the city, it's kind of a question that you ask that you're going to basically dismiss, right? one way or the other, or whichever of those two questions that I just posed, right? You're gonna say, well, I know you 70% of the residents said they don't want to see deer shot. But if that's what we need to do to get to the solution to the problem, then we're in a sense dismissing their responses.
I
So
understand.
be very careful in what you ask and what you're going to do with that.
So if there was a little bit, even if it was just 4 or 5 bullet points that were educational in nature, on the survey I'm talking about, we have this many deer if we had collected data, or the most common, I don't know, you could tell me, but 1, 2, 3, do most does birth 1 fawn, 2 fawns, or 3 fawns? And what trajectory is that putting us on? Because the thing is, when you ask questions to people and they don't understand the nature of the particular, I don't want to even call it a problem because that even skews it, but the nature of the issue that you're talking about, to me, it's like, kind of contributing to what you just said, whereas you're asking them questions, but you're not, like you just said, they wouldn't answer. Of course, I don't want to shoot them. I'd rather sterilize them. But you're doing the same thing by leaving out information.
Right, but you gotta, again, what are we trying to get, right? What we're trying to get is, if you have a problem with deer in Cleveland Heights, we want to hear about it. And then what is that problem that you in your eyes, the problem is?
But if you have data that we already have, like again, if most deer, I think you put up, does have 1.6. What you tell me? What was it? 1.6 fawns.
Well, I think it was an increase of 30% a year.
Okay.
Yeah, that's an increase of 30%.
So okay, so maybe we don't get into 1, 2, 3, but maybe that. No, with a few givens, I just think you get so much further. I don't think people are thinking about this some people just, okay, we have a lot of deer and they're kind of a nuisance. That's not enough of a good place to start, in my view.
But that in their eyes is the problem, right?
Yeah. But
some people don't want any deer in their yard. They just don't like seeing deer. That may not be what me and you perceive as in our eyes, a valid concern, but it is a concern to them.
we're looking for solutions, and I don't know. I just think there needs to be.
I'll give you the solutions. That part's easy.
Yeah, but the balance.
2 deer. I mean, that's the solution. Is we got to reduce the numbers.
Yeah.
And just how do we do that? There's different ways we can tackle that part of it.
Well, I almost think that is a secondary. I mean, I guess from my perspective, I'd like to see the data before we jump to any kind of conclusions.
Absolutely.
And I think this is, generally a peaceful community, and I think all communities are going to be peaceful. Okay, that's what I want to think. I mean, you certainly think Shaker is, but Shaker does this, Beechwood does this, South Euclid has a slightly different approach. I think once we get this data and we see the extent of the issues and we get some counts, and I think, Tony, I do think you're right on. I mean, because one of the things that we learned a lot, and I'm pointing at Council Member Larson, is we learned about this, 30% increased numbers, and just how that becomes increasingly compounding. It's like compound interest. It just adds up and adds up, and it becomes to a point where, 5 years ago, if you're trying to make this decision, it's very different making the decision now, because now your deer population is more than double than what it was. So that's.
So I would like to hear from the committee, like what my regional question from the 2 weeks ago, which is, what are we going to do to try to get partnerships with, those concentric circles of deer that we saw in that, the rendering in the in the PowerPoint, because I really think that needs to be a component at least, because this is not a Cleveland Heights problem.
Well, I would agree with that. I would also like to move forward on our agenda because we've got other things we need to do, and this meeting's supposed to end at 6. So I'd like to continue this conversation and let's do some homework. Let's look at some questions. I'm going to go talk to some of the cities. If you guys have any additional thoughts on what we'd want to do to move forward, I would welcome those. I mean,
No, I agree with Craig, Councilor Kopp, that the citizen survey is really important, and we keep hearing that. And so I think that's a next step for us, is to get ready to roll it out. And when we roll it out, we publicize it enough on the city e-news and all over that anybody that's interested in this, and there are a lot of people that, whichever side they're on, will step forward and give us that information. So if we could just get that link to your survey, that'd be very helpful at this point, Jeff. Thank you so much. Thank you for all your work.
okay.
No problem. I'll send that to Jim and then he can share it with you guys.
That sounds great. We have the next step. Jeff, if we get 5 more minutes of your time, I would be grateful because you're sort of an expert in this area. Our next agenda item is legislation to discuss prohibiting deer feeding. This seems to be a low-hanging fruit kind of thing. Is this something that you would recommend to the communities?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that certainly helps not only from a deer standpoint, but a lot of other situations. So certainly addressing it. The biggest thing is that, and I think John kind of talked about this a little bit with Metro Parks and how they deal with it. Just understand there is going to be enforcement, right? And that doesn't necessarily have to mean writing tickets, but somebody, if you're not going to, if driving down the road, you see somebody's feeding, and again, doing it in violation of the city ordinance, somebody needs to say something, or else then it's all for naught. So just make sure that somebody is in charge of following up on those situations as they get identified.
Okay.
We could do legislation in terms of educating people on feeding the deer, but we could also do a public service announcement type education, so that at least as a beginning point, there wouldn't be any enforcement paradigm involved, except maybe neighbors saying to a neighbor who's feeding the deer, we heard that we really shouldn't be doing this because it's not good for the deer. So have you been involved with committees or communities where they just do a PSA and don't do an actual enforceable piece of legislation?
None's coming to mind as far as like they say, hey, we're just going to tackle it this way, other than providing information on their website. But I don't know any that's done like a big campaign to try to educate and get folks to stop it. Now, from our standpoint, we did just finish a brochure down the same path on feeding and baiting of wildlife as a whole. I can certainly provide you that that document, and that can help if in your PSA if you're going to go that route. The one thing that becomes always a contentious thing when you get into the feeding is how do you tackle the songbirds, because you don't want to necessarily go and address that. But it's very easy to say, hey, all I'm doing is I'm feeding the songbirds or squirrels, and then now they bypass. So cities will sometimes say, we're going to pass an order and say, you just can't feed deer, right? Well, all somebody has to do is claim that it's for some other reason. Now you've lost your ability from an enforcement standpoint. So I always kind of focus on, and how our publication got pieced together is on responsible feeding, is that if somebody is doing something that is causing problems, then that situation should be addressed. So I try to focus and suggest feeding ordinances similarly how you would like a noise ordinance. Right? You're not necessarily going around looking for all these places, but when a situation arises that it's a problem, then you can tackle it. again, it just depends on how you craft the ordinance and to what level you guys want to address the feeding part of it.
Newark, Ohio had a ordinance and they established that criteria we're talking about by saying that the feeding station for the birds or whatever you're feeding has to be 5 feet off the ground. But can't deer eat stuff that's 5 feet off the ground? Is that out of their reach?
No, they can, but it just makes it harder. But the bigger part is not so much the height, it's dealing with spilt seed. That's the bigger problem, because once the seed's on the ground, now it's accessible to them again.
All right, thank you.
Jeff, one last question. You know, one of the things that was kind of a wake up for me is when you have an increasing deer population, you start losing your songbirds because there's just no way for them to nest and for them to get food. Is that an accurate statement? Is that an accurate conclusion?
Well, if I understand what you're asking, the only reason why you feed wildlife is for selfish reasons, because you want to see them. No feeding of any kind in Ohio does anything to sustain or keep animals alive. So even songbirds, it is simply because you want to see songbirds in your backyard. And then putting the feed out there does not make them reliant on it. You take that feed away, they'll go find food. So I think, does that answer kind of get to where you were going?
That's getting there. So,
Yeah.
okay. Well, thank you very much for your time. Any questions for us or?
No, I'll shoot the link over to you, and then if you have any questions on it, just let me know.
Sounds great. Always grateful for your time. Thank you.
Bye,
All
Jeff.
right, yeah,
Okay.
no problem.
Thank you.
And then there was us. I really appreciate Jeff's time.
Oh,
Very good.
His presentation, as
He's
well as
committed
John
to
for the
helping.
metro parks was really very good.
he's committed to helping us.
I'm just concerned that the community is going to be jumping in. Some members of our community are going to be jumping to conclusion that, this is all about us trying to kill deer.
Yeah.
And I really want to make sure that we have data so we can get that back to the community. And I think from just a strategy perspective, if we do need to go with like an aerial survey, that's something you do in the wintertime. This is not something that's going to be an immediate, we're not going to see any kind of immediate anything being done if we have to wait, another 6 months. So, I don't think anybody's making any kind of decision. I don't think we're making a decision anytime soon. But I do think getting the data in maybe a 2 to 3 month period of time, I think is very helpful for us.
Do you recall from the hearing what the last year of data was that John Barber put on his map? It was from 23 or 24?
I don't believe it was probably 23.
So perhaps we could ask him or
It's getting it from the police department. I'd have to go look at the data that we have from the police department. In our next meeting, why don't we make sure that we include an item to kind of talk about the data that we already have,
okay, that'd be good.
and also talk about the questions.
I just think the citizen survey, because we know people reach out to us all the time on this issue, we need to get a feel for where everybody's at, and if we can do that intelligently and professionally, I think would behoove us to have that data collected, the survey, citizen survey.
Well, there's an overwhelming majority of the people that have attended the public hearing, and I think that we hear from in just correspondence that believe that there's a problem, and they're looking for solutions. There was one gentleman in the meeting that left abruptly, and I was worried that he felt intimidated because there were so many people at that hearing that were, talking about deer problems. And I would have really loved to hear his feedback. Maybe he just had to go. But I think this is the kind of citizen survey that we're gonna help, that will sort of tease out, people that have opinions on really all ends of this. So Yeah, I should have acknowledged the mayor. I was gonna do that as we were moving between agenda items. Mayor Sarin was here momentarily. He sat down and he's left the room. So this legislation to discuss prohibiting deer feeding. Councilmember Larson, you did a lot of research and you shared that with us.
Did I share it with, did you get some copies?
Did you send an email out, but while we were chatting, I was pulling up some ordinances from some other things.
No, I didn't. I sent something to
I thought I did.
Josh, and I don't know.
I thought I did through Addie.
That's all right.
Yeah, because I have examples from Newark, Ohio,
Yep. I think that
and
was one that I
Worthington,
came
Ohio.
up. Yep.
So Worthington looks, what I have from Newark's is actually the ordinance that evolved from the legislation.
Mhm.
And then we have the city of Worthington actually, the ordinance that they wrote. And so we have resources to be able to put together some legislation, should we decide to do that.
Well, sort of big picture wise, is this something that we wanna pursue any farther?
Yes, I'll just speak for myself. We know there's a problem. We have to do something. We cannot let this continue to fester because it is only going to get worse.
Right.
And I know this is gonna end up making some people angry, but this is a first step in trying to address the problem. And I don't know to what extent people are feeding animals. I do know that you have occasions that people are absolutely, this is their passion, is feeding wild animals, be it cats, deer, whatever. I see some cities have ordinances that prohibit the feeding of any animals. And there are some people that are gonna do that, are willing to, risk getting a ticket or going to jail over this. But I think this is a first good step, and we need to start educating the residents about the problem. And I wish that we could get a link to the first 40 minutes of our the public hearing on this.
do that.
And get it posted and let residents know, please tune in to this.
So one of the things I was thinking of adding Addie to do is on the council site to have just a page dedicated for the deer, what we're doing, what our plans are.
It's transparency, that'd be good.
I don't think we're gonna see that from the administration. And, I asked the mayor, is there someone from police or public works who can participate with us and even sit at the table for the hearing? But I just think there's capacity issues that they're working through.
And we don't have to reinvent the wheel. I just took a look at Beechwood's website, and how they rolled this out and how they educated their residents and what they've got now, explaining what they're doing, why it was necessary.
Well, you need $1 million communications department that's gonna help with that. And I'm not sure we're gonna get that support, honestly.
But for now, we could, as it's been suggested, utilize our spot on the website, and all of us can come promote it, whether we do it in our committee meetings, our committee of the whole, or a council meeting, to have people come to that spot. There's an ODNR public service announcement, keep our wildlife healthy. It's excellently worded and written, and so that, along with asking people to, as a beginning starting point, right? It's just like you said, we need to start doing something to show that we are aware and that we want to educate people and answer their questions. They're welcome to come and talk to us about it. So I would like to see us put something together that Addie could post up on our section and we can publicize.
Okay, so when it comes to legislation, I do think the legislation gives us the ability to also promote all of this and have conversations with it, and don't pass something on an emergency basis, pass it through multiple readings.
Yeah.
just so we have the opportunity to really get the community comfortable with it. So we need to have legislation showing, deliver it to the law department. I kind of figured we'd actually work with the law department, get the legislation together, and then bring it to council as a whole.
Okay.
And, try to, is there a way that you can get draft legislation or work with our, I can spit it out, our law department?
Yeah, sure. Did you found the ordinance that Beechwood passed?
On feeding, they don't have one, to my surprise. Did you find one in doing your research?
No,
I looked. To my surprise, they do not have one. Unless I missed it or it's not updated.
well,
So
how about,
let's see updates, because I can't imagine that they would be doing what they're doing in terms of culling and not prohibiting the feeding, but
what
I'll
I,
look to see whether they've got something updated here.
because in our legislative process, the law department likes to have a model, which I have one, and if anybody could find one other one, Worthington's is,
Really, pretty good.
I think
Really?
Worthington's pretty good.
it's straightforward.
I'd like to see some protection regarding the songbirds though, because, people are gonna say, I feed my birds, I don't want someone to slap handcuffs on me because I'm feeding birds.
I suspect that there have been very few prosecutions. But what it's aimed at is the persistent person that is going to feed intentionally on purpose. Come heck or high water, they're gonna feed the deer. And that's what this is intended to address, not the incidental. And I think, and I don't know if it's this one or others, have affirmative defenses to put forward. It's not intended to be punitive.
Right.
But it's intended to address the one or two people that are gonna be in a neighborhood that insist on doing this. And maybe it will act as a deterrent. And the fact that there is, if this is the correct one, it has a civil remedy that you could take someone to court to get a court order to block them, shows that that's the depth of the problem, and it's aimed at those handful of people.
Is there a way to, we were just talking about it, would be in response to a complaint. Have you seen legislation and all the legislation you've looked at where we could put that in as a provision so that the police don't have to think they're driving around looking for people feeding deer? That it would be in response to a complaint lodged through the Mayor's Action Center to access?
I just think that comes as a directive from the safety director, from the chief.
Okay.
That's not the intention of this. I mean, we got a lot of other ordinances that don't get enforced and can't get enforced as a practical matter.
Right.
Again, this is, I think, intended to stop the chronic person that is, buying the 40 pounds of feed and putting it out in their backyard.
I will go ahead and send something to Director Hannah. I'll send him this one, Worthington so far, the best one I've seen. And then I'll copy the mayor as well.
Okay, I think that's good work. Anything other on this piece of legislation?
No, I'm glad we're doing it, moving ahead on it.
Okay, so our next item, which is the ETC Institute Resident Satisfaction Survey Proposal. We received a contract for services, a scope of work between ESC and the city of Cleveland Heights, Ohio. This is sort of like if we were to make a next step and try to do this as a council. This is again a residential satisfaction survey. The last one was done in 2020. A little backstory, the whole reason why this has sort of come to our attention is we looked at something that Shaker did and they surveyed their residents with a similar survey. And they found out that the traffic conditions in Shaker and Shaker traffic safety was their number one item. And we sort of suspect there are similarities between our two cities. But when we went back to, I think we would have already had this information if we were doing these surveys on a regular basis. So it is, we've seen cities do these residential satisfaction surveys every couple years. We met with Ryan, we looked at the last set of surveys he did. He adjusted his price to give us a much better price. We've been told by the mayor specifically that there's fear that such a survey would be political in nature. I can't imagine under any circumstances where any survey done at any time would be perceived in this climate that we're in right now as being political. I would love to be able to take this out of committee and take it to our the council as a whole. If we have a majority feeling that pursuing something like this would be helpful. I look at it not only for what Shaker's done, but during our budget process, we have stale data in really understanding what our citizens are looking for. And I kind of go back to looking at what Council Member Petrus and myself have been pushing for, which is more money for the roads. I would like to be able to have something, I mean, it's a feeling, I think it's a consensus that many of us have that our roads are in disrepair. We're supposed to be spending $6 million a year on our roads. We're spending a little over $2 million. That's something that we need to be investing more in. But I think there's other things that could guide us when we're doing our budget process. And I would suggest that we stay away from any kind of questions that are mayor-related or administration related, and just stick to what was done in 2020. And just do a repeat, just so we can compare between what was done in 2020 versus what they can do over the summer. So I'd love to know your thoughts.
I think it's a great idea. That last survey was, I thought, apolitical, as had all the prior surveys had been. I don't think there were any questions about, how is the city council doing? How is the city manager doing? They were more general questions. The only thing they would need to do is pull out the COVID-related questions. But in looking at the prior year surveys, they were all pretty consistent about the questions that were asked. And I think you need to ask the same questions, and you need to use the same methodology to have results that we can then compare in prior years. I mean, we were doing them pretty consistently there for every other year.
Mm-hmm.
And then they stopped. I think it's a good thing to do. It will let you know. Again, my concern is it's not with the government, but it was more as the serve. Are you satisfied with the services? Do you feel safe? What do you think about our parks? Questions like that.
Mm-hmm. Councilmember Larson?
I'm torn because I've been talking with the people that kind of guide me through this job.
Mm-hmm.
And you've just, by encapsulating your purpose as making certain that this is data that tests the opinion of our citizens on the services that they expect and should receive, and frame it that way, that's the only way I could support it. Because we have to be apolitical, or we're gonna get the optics thrown at us from all sides. You know that, Councilor Posh, you know that. So if we can frame it that way, I can get behind it. And then I would also additionally, what I talked to you, or I'm thinking about is do some legislation where a survey is done every even year. Even if we end up doing another one next year so that it's in our legislation and it's funded and it's sustained, every other year, citizens know they're going to get the opportunity to express their opinion. I think that's really important. We codify it.
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Because it should have never been, we should have never stopped doing it.
So the last survey was dated in October 2020. If we hold back the results until after the election, there's no way that I think that anyone could legitimately claim that it was done for a political purpose. And it would be very helpful to guide the, whatever the makeup is of the city council next year. And if it was released in November, early in November after the election, they would have the results to also guide them during the budget process. So I would say, let's go ahead and get it lined up to have it done, and then instruct that the results be held until after the election.
Can we do that with public information? I mean, can we do that if someone makes a public information request?
Well, ask, we will talk to them to find out what their process is. And until they turn the results over to the city, I would have them do it as a matter of timing. I don't recall when they sent the surveys out.
He did give us an example if we waited until after the election. For instance, he said they'd work on compiling it in October. It would be out in November, December, no, October. Anyway, there was 4 months there, right? That we
It
had.
was, I believe, an October timeframe when
Yeah.
we last spoke about.
Yeah, so it sounded like it was 4 months. So if we just don't start it until it falls into place that we have the summary and the results after the election, then we run it for a couple months, because you want to get as many people participating as possible. And he talked about all the follow-up they do to make sure that they have as good a representation of all the demographics.
Mhm.
That was the very impressive part. The thing about it is, do you feel that the questions that are on that survey are getting at Cleveland Heights as a unique city? Being based in Kansas, they're not local. They don't know much about us as a city. So could we review the questions and have some input on them before it's rolled out?
I believe that was part of their process.
Yeah.
They would want some collaboration on the questions.
And you said he's revised the cost. What did he come in at? This for 300 or 400?
Completing 300, they're printing and mailing out 3,000. And the total service fee was basically $13,250. There was additional work that they were going to do with their additional add-ons, and they were going to do all the add-ons for us at no cost,
Yeah.
except for the driving here.
And we should have that in our council budget
We should, yeah, this should be.
for consultants.
Right.
How about buy-in from the administration? Where do we go with that?
Well, we're still trying to get information from the Burgess and Burgess
Yeah.
surveys. We know that they've talked to users, employees, they've talked to members in the community. We know that there's been presentations to staff. We've done public information requests. We just received a response back from the law department today, which I shared individually with you. I have not had a chance to look at it, but I did a quick look. It just looks like, well, these are the questions we're gonna ask, but we've been told by former employees, current employees, that this information has been presented already. So why we don't have access to that information is beyond me. That's why I look at a survey like this, it's like, they're gonna work in a vacuum and they're not gonna include us. We certainly have every right to do something like this.
It will be a council-sponsored survey.
This is gonna have to be a council-sponsored survey. I mean, I'm not sure I I'm not sure it would, well, we've already been told that there was no interest being done, possibly next year. The mayor has told us that. Maybe he'll change his mind, maybe that's an option. I don't know what to do regarding the thoughts about holding the results or making sure the results are timed to be after the election. You know, if that's what my peers think, I'm okay with that.
Gentleman has.
Maybe I could just share a thought. If the survey were done to yield result to support the budgetary process, that might kind of support the calendarization such that we avoid the political aspect, and it's strictly a council and administrative endeavor to support a better, more inclusive budget process.
Mm-hmm.
The other thought, just kind of related to that, is rather than seeking opinions, perhaps the prioritization of initiatives would be something that would be incorporated into the development of the survey. So rather than saying, are you satisfied with the refuse removal? Are you satisfied with yard waste management, all these things? Perhaps if they, between yourselves and the professional surveyors, if you could come up with a way to capture people's thinking in terms of where we need additional investment. You know, where do we want to, if we've got limited resources, budget, you know, where do we want to focus that budget?
Well, that's the whole reason why I think we need to have this data. And we had a lot of trouble in our last budget process trying to figure out even why we were being asked to do capital improvements on things. You know, we know the roads are bad. It's one of the best easy examples to use. You know, the roads are really bad. We're not funding them enough. I would like to have some data, you know, besides a feeling that's good. Timing wise, do I have permission to, do I have a consensus to take this to the law department, wrap legislation around this and present this to council as a whole?
From me, yes.
Yes, for me as well.
Okay, and then we can understand, we can explain your concerns, the political nature of it. I can explain the financial piece to it. And we can discuss the timing of the results. So, okay, I think that's a plan. Is there any other business for this committee? I hear none. Let's adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much, everybody.
I have a comment.